Hello, and welcome back to Generation Zombie, raising healthy humans in a world of devices and AI. I appreciate it's been quite a long time since I have done one of these podcasts, and that's been for various reasons. And there has been a lot in this space over the recent months, the last year, which is great. It's really good. And there does seem to be a bit of a black and white argument going on about banning, not banning on social media. I don't think we're kind of getting to a point where we understand the nuance that is in this sector. It's huge. I mean, there's so much to think about in this work. I started working in this area many, many years ago and wrote the book Generation Zombie, which is behind me there. That was published last year. And really, I just wanted to kind of refocus on that work and what I try to say in that, because still don't think this is quite understood in the same way that we understand that being online can be dangerous or there's a lot of risk online. I think we all know that by now. Managing that has become a problem because children have got very used to being on their screens and their devices, and when you try to take it away, it can cause relationships and fractions and ruptures in the home and the family unit. So that's certainly something that I've noticed, and a lot of the work that I've done has been related to that in the last year from a clinical perspective. That being said, the work or my insights really, so are kind of different. They're not really about the online world. So my work focuses on looking at the environment of somebody's childhood and what happened in their childhood to lead them to present with whatever behaviours that might be. Now, you'll probably have seen that I do forensic and criminal commentary. So I'm looking at what happened in that person's life for them to go ahead on this trajectory towards perpetrating the crimes that they have committed. This is the way I risk assess. It's the way I risk assess across any sector, is to look really crucially at the early years environment and obviously everything that goes on following that, because that can either be reparative or it can compound what has happened. Now, with devices, my work in this area started by looking at a device as a digital displacement for the parent-child relationship. What happens when you put a device in between a parent and their child, whether that's the parent having the device or the child having the device? It's a barrier to the relationship. Now, when you look at two of you on the devices, the child's on their device, you're on your device, it's this double pane barrier. And that was where my work started, was to look at the relational aspect and how that was being affected by devices. And I think that the rapid integration of smart devices into family life has altered the relational conditions in which infants and children develop. Our existing literature on children and technology tends to emphasize screen time, online safety, sleep, attention, behavioral outcomes, and the risks associated with social media. And they are very important areas, but they don't fully account for the psychological significance of the device within that parent-child relationship. The work that I do proposes that the smart device is a third. It's a persistent object within the relational field that might compete for parental attention. It interrupts emotional availability and it alters the child's experience of being held in mind. So that's where a child knows that their parent has a space in their mind for them. When we have children, when we give birth, there's a reorganization of our psychic structures in our mind. And that reorganization is so that we can accommodate the needs of this new infant that comes into the world and needs full care. And when we have that reorganization, it can throw up all sorts in our mind as well. It can destabilize us. It can make us feel quite unwell. It can make us feel unsettled. It's not just hormones. There's actually all of this sort of restructuring of our own mind, maybe triggers back to our own childhood of things that maybe we can't even remember, things that are just stored in there that get unsettled when we have to, when it's like a snow globe being shaken and then it resettles in a certain way. And the work that I did and the book centers around, and it maybe doesn't talk about it in such psychoanalytical concepts or framing, but I am looking at the concept of the third as a psychoanalytical concept. but I am looking at this persistent object in our relational field that might compete for parental attention, interrupt our emotional availability, and alters that child's experience, as I said. So I'm looking at at object relations theory. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that is one of the key kind of modalities or theories within psychoanalytical work. This is about how we relate to different objects in our lives, and objects are usually people. How do we relate to our primary caregivers, to others in that unit, to our siblings, and where we are in that sibship? How does that impact our brain and our mind and our development and our behaviours? Now, I bring the device into this because historically, these theories have been around for a really long time. They form the basis of most policies and processes relating to children. For example, children are no longer taken away from the mother after birth, typically. Infant, unless medically necessary or otherwise, the infant stays with the mother, skin on skin, because we know that that attachment is absolutely crucial for healthy psychological development. I argue that the device poses a risk to that attachment, not just at that point, but it's the ongoing little chips of always having that device there throughout the child's life that erodes it in some way. So I look at attachment theory, containment. Containment is the process of a primary caregiver knowing what you as an infant needs and being able to give that back to you in a way that is tolerable for you. So this comes from a psychoanalyst called Bion. It's his theory, and he talks about a process of reverie. An example of this is a baby cries and a parent hears that and is able to then give the baby what the baby needs to soothe that distress. So if a baby's crying for hunger, parent feeds the baby feels contained emotionally, its needs have been met. So this is the start of containment, and it changes and evolves as children mature, as they get older. In order to be able to contain, we need to be emotionally present, attuned, and attached to our child. And I think devices get in the way of our ability to be parentally responsive to the needs of our children as we're on them. And I'm not saying this in a judgy way, because I've been there myself. And probably half the reason that I noticed it, to be honest, is in my own choices or how it affected me when my daughter was small. And there wasn't the knowledge that there is now. She's nearly 13. There wasn't the advice, there wasn't the knowledge back then. It just wasn't the awareness of it back then. It was just you were on your phone doing what you were doing. I was, trying to work from home, trying to look after a child at the same time and juggle all of those things. And, now I look back and I think, yeah, probably wasn't as responsive as it could have been had I not had a device there. But I also needed to put food on the table. So, it was trying to make it work alongside the reality of life. Okay. So I'm not saying this from a preachy or judgmental perspective. This is coming from purely academic, clinical perspective, but also personal experience of this as well. So I look a lot at that parental technoference, they call it, or that mobile phone interrupted interactions, and the impact that has on children's screen use, language development, and digital and emotional regulation. So I try to introduce the concept of digital displacement to describe the replacement or interruption of embodied relational experience by device-mediated stimulation, distraction, or pseudo-connections that I think that we have with screens. The device might function as a socially sanctioned addictive object or a pseudo-container for our emotions, or an avoidant object, so something that we use to distract ourselves in a family life if we're not particularly comfortable or happy or we're bored. I'm not saying that all tech is bad or inherently harmful, but how it's integrated into the lives of children can be problematic. So I just really wanted to reintroduce this because I feel that, yes, the talk about devices now tends to be focused mainly on social media. And absolutely, social media is the mechanism that holds attention to the phone, isn't it? So it's one of the reasons that we're spending so much time on the phone. I've always been interested in the why, okay, and the what. So why are we spending that much time on the phone, and why is that a problem? So what does it actually do? Why does someone behave in that way? So not the what, it's the social media or it's the addictive algorithm. It's like, we know that. But why is that a problem? What does it mean for that person and their development? Yesterday, I spoke on Talk TV about an article that had been published, some research that said that by 2030, 2/3 of teenagers will have a mental health problem. And this is kind of what I was getting at with the book, that if we don't get it right in the early years, if we don't this is preventative stuff. So this book, the work I do, is preventative. If we come in with this preventative approach to screen time, we can mitigate the harms that screens pose to our children later down the line. So lots of issues with mental health start early, in the early years. It's quite largely to do with attachment and relationships with the primary caregivers and those around us. Our early years environment is absolutely crucial to who we become later on in life and how we struggle or how we sink or swim, really. And I propose that these devices in the early years do have the ability to throw that development, which otherwise would have been healthy, completely off course. And unfortunately, it seems I was right. And we are seeing a lot of this now coming out in press, coming out in science, seeing it in the education environment, seeing it clinically as well. So this paper that came out yesterday didn't surprise me when it said that 2/3 of teens will have a mental health problem by 2030. I do believe that it comes back to too much time on screens in childhood. And it's not just the time on the screens, okay? It's the time that it's what they're not doing when they're on the screens. It's not this. I think there's this almost really scientific perspective on it, which is, well, it's not the screens directly causing the problem. Okay, fine. I get that. But let's be realistic. If you're spending an average with the worldwide average is 6,040 minutes on a screen per day, and actually teens, Gen Z is 7, 8, 9 hours plus. If you're spending that much time on a screen, it's what you are not doing in that time. That's where the problem is. So what could you have been doing? So for teens, ideally, for all ages, for children in the early years, if they're not integrating with their world and their primary caregiver, it has an impact on their musculoskeletal development. It can have an impact on their speech and language skills. It can have an impact on their eyesight. It can have an impact on their dexterity. It can have an neurodevelopment as well. And all of this is scientifically researched. If you do read the book, first few chapters, if you find them boring, just move over to the case study in chapter 3. This case study of Tommy there, that will resonate, I think, with most parents who've got a toddler or have had one, because you can sort of see the insidiousness of how the device impacts every interaction with a child and how that repeated interaction over time, how that can then result in a problem. Okay, so it's not obvious, is it? It's not an obvious trauma. It's not an obvious issue. But it's the repeated exposure and the repeated losses of interaction with the environment and the consequences of that then have an impact on the child that we don't see obviously until later on. Now, you speak to anybody who works in education, especially in the early years, they will be telling you that children are starting school underdeveloped speech and language skills, emotional regulation skills, even stamina. This is something I've been saying for a while. So if you've listened to me before, I'm probably repeating myself, but this hasn't changed. In fact, it's just getting worse, which makes me so sad to hear that. But in the early years, if a young child learns from interacting with their primary caregiver and their environment, they're meant to get up and move around. They're meant to be looking at this really wild and overstimulating world. That's how the brain becomes acclimatized to noise and movement, and I suppose what we might find as overwhelmed is by being in it. So when we get used to it, then we become desensitized, and then we can tolerate it better when we go into an education environment or any other busy environment. If we're spending too much time, if that toddler's spending too much time behind a screen, it has an impact on their development, the amount of words that they hear, the amount of words that they produce themselves, and language production. It has an impact on their ability to regulate their emotions if we're putting a device in front of them all the time. And I feel like I've said this a million times, so I'm not going to repeat myself here. It is in my TED Talk. It is in the book. And I probably said it on an episode of this podcast as well. But with teens, it's the same sort of concept. Teenage years are for experience and learning. They need to be engaging in activities. They need to be doing their extracurricular activities, going and hanging out with their friends, falling out with their friends. All of these things are good because it helps them to develop those interpersonal skills, which are absolutely essential for moving forward into later adolescence, into adulthood as well. Now, if we've got teens behind screens, they're not having an opportunity to practice the complex side of human relationships. They might be able to send texts and have these superficial relationships via social media, but it absolutely is not the same as having challenging conversations in real life and dealing with difficult circumstances in real life. That is a completely different skill set. Similarly, if they are on the devices on social media, because that is the addictive platform that holds their attention, they're not going out and doing these extracurricular activities such as music or sports or something to do with arts, whatever it is, they're not doing that. Now, inevitably, when you engage in something like that, you will fail. And that, again, is a good thing. Learning to fail will help our children to succeed later in life. Now, if they don't learn to fail, they are so frightened of failure because they don't feel that they've got the tools and the skills and the resources to cope with failure, then they are less likely to take those chances. Or when they do have to, such as GCSEs, they become overwhelmed. And if we could bring it back a bit to the earlier teen years, if we are encouraging them to go and do these activities where they will fail, they have to get back up, which helps to develop resilience. But they'll also succeed as well. They will also win the game, pass the exam, receive praise. They'll feel good about themselves. It helps to develop confidence and competence in a certain area, and it helps them to learn that they can do these challenging things when they present. So this is why I think spending so much time, why I bring this idea of 2/3 of teens having mental health problems back to devices, is because I do think it's largely related to how they're spending their youth, not going outside, not spending as much time with friends, not doing as many activities. And this isn't imagined. Schools do say that when they come to putting CVs together for teens, that there's nothing to put on them, because half of them will say they just spent the teen years scrolling TikTok. They're not going out and doing these things that they need to do. And it's not their fault. These are addictive platforms. If we're going to put it in front of them, of course, they're going to sit and scroll. We would all do the same. Well, I think we've all been caught down the rabbit holes, haven't we, of these social media platforms. So we can't expect teens to regulate them. Additionally, they're on these devices till late at night. So how they're not sleeping as well. Teens need a lot of sleep. They can't regulate their emotions if they haven't had enough sleep. They make poorer decisions, poorer choices, more impulsive. It just has such a negative consequence and knock-on effect for the child. So I think throughout the child's life, and this is kind of what I tried to get at in the book, is that if we start giving devices early, then we are setting the scene. We're putting unstable foundations in place. Then when we allow them to have constant access to this unprecedented intrusion of an object into the child's life, this has never happened before. We've never in history have we, across all generations, and every child, had an object that's intruded, that's been so addictive in a child's life. It's just never happened. There hasn't, obviously in previous centuries, there were different things we were giving to children which are now illegal that we would never give to a child now. But that was for a cough or something like that. So that was given for a reason. It wasn't something that was just given randomly all the time. This is an unusual, unique situation, and it will have ramifications. You cannot introduce highly addictive object into the life of a child with unfettered access and then not expect there to be a consequence. Whether you can see it now or not, there will be some sort of consequence. People who do adapt their behaviours and change whilst the child is young, so stop giving, iPads all the time to toddlers, they notice a change almost instantly in their children. That shows you how much of an impact the device does have. So again, I just want to stress, I'm not shaming, I'm not judging. This is about education. I feel that we haven't been told all of this. There was no sort of warning on the box or It's just not common knowledge, is it, that giving a child a device could be causing damage, which might be challenging to undo, although not impossible. But I just think that most parents, knowing this, would make different choices. Anyhow, so I'm not going to ramble on any more about this today, but I just wanted to sort of start getting the podcast going again. I wanted to just remind you of what my focus is, which is looking at how it displaces human relationships, especially the parent-child relationship, and the impact that that has on child development as the child is maturing throughout their life. And I will be back with more episodes and more guests. And if you have any questions that you want me to answer, please feel free to DM me or email me or just contact me any way that you can. Thank you very much for listening. And I look forward to hopefully providing you with some useful insights as time goes on.